I'm Pavelka. Today we're going to be looking at Think Alouds. Think Alouds can be used in every area of the curriculum that you're working with. And typically we see Think Alouds being used whole class. Think Alouds are fabulous because they allow us to get into our students' minds as they're problem solving. So it lets us really see, what are you thinking? And it kind of lets us answer the question of, how are you connecting this new piece of information? How will you remember this piece of information? Does it remind you of anything? You see, the more we can get into students' minds as they're processing the information, the more we're going to be able to help them to make the connections needed to process all of those new experiences and new information. Research tells us that we do learn best when we connect new facts, new experiences, new information with something familiar. And that's where Think Alouds are going to come in. So this is our Think Aloud cloud. Let's look at an example. What you see here are 3 levels of ocean life that my students were working with during a science unit. And they needed to know these 3 levels of life in the order. They needed to do or know examples of animals that were at the levels and information about the levels. So what we did was we passed around the Think Aloud cloud. As students think aloud, they put the cloud on. Here's what was happening. We were working with the first layer, which is plankton, top layer of the ocean life. One of my students put the cloud on and said, think of a plank when you walk the plank. When you walk the plank, the first thing you do is you hit the water. So plank something, plankton, is the first level of ocean life. Think about walking the plank, you hit the water. It's the first level. Another child said, oh, I'm ready for the hat. So we passed the hat to the other person and said, think about a plank. It's thick, it's straight, it doesn't move. That's the way the animals move at that level. They are stiff, they only move and drift with the current. Another child at that point screamed and said, I need the hat. We passed it over and he said, the definition in our glossary says that plankton move and drift with the current. Do you see how that student said the definition, move and drift with the current, in a conversation? Because he was picturing plank of wood, plank on the top. Now we're looking at the second layer, which was nekton. So one of my students said, think of your neck. Your neck is in the middle of the head and the rest of you. So neck something, nekton, is that middle layer. Now, we also have to remember, as we're thinking about this example, that we teach concepts and information in the way that we understand them. I never would have introduced this in terms of walking the plank or a plank of wood or neck. It's students. The more connections they make in their understanding, in what they already know, the more they're going to understand and grasp these concepts. And sometimes the concepts are abstract because they haven't seen them. So the last one was benthos, and this is the lowest level in terms of connections, but it's working because it's a little something. Benthos was on the bottom, B for the bottom. So now before we take the test, we started to brainstorm and say, how are you going to remember? We passed the Think Aloud cap around, and everybody started to come up with these different activities. Think about your neck for the middle, nekton. Think about the plank. Also, with nekton, one of the students said, think about the way your neck moves. It's very different from a plank of wood. That's the difference in terms of how the animals move. They've got more movement in that middle section. Think of your neck versus the wood. So the more we pass this cloud and say, what are you thinking? What are you connecting it to? How are you going to remember it? The more we're going to see students increase that achievement, the more we're going to see them understand that information because they're connecting it to something they already know. This was a hat that one of my students brought in. This is the Think Aloud cap now in one classroom. So as they come up with an idea, they want to pass the cap. See the lights? One of my students said, the light bulb is going off. I've got it. Here's how I'm going to remember it. So to close it up, the more we get students to think aloud, which means tell me what you're thinking, the more we're going to get them to make connections, to also hear each other. Think about when you give the information to students. We probably give the information a couple of times, but in the same way, because we're understanding it that way. As soon as we start passing the cloud around, you get students who say, think of it this way. What about this? Think about this. And the more they talk, the more they think aloud, the greater we're going to see their achievement. Thank you for spending some time with me today.